footage had threatened us with a second Nakba while denying the first ever occurred, yet they feel no shame in threatening a second. While what is called the center left in Israel discusses democracy, they seem content with our Orwellian reality where some are more equal than others. There is only one way to achieve democracy, security, and justice: end the occupation and live in peace. Recently, I sought to know the status of the Israeli archives and discovered that 99% of the archives, especially those of the Shin Bet, Mossad, and the military, have been completely closed to researchers for nearly a century. What we know about the crimes of the Nakba is only a fraction of the truth in the Israeli archives. I made inquiries to understand why, but their response was silence. But let me tell you, we the Palestinian people know all the stories of the Nakba crimes against our people from our parents. We don't need the Israeli archives to know the truth. The archives don't hide the truth from us. They hide from the younger Jewish generation. They know that a conscience will awaken among broad sections of Jewish youth when they learn the true extent of the crimes committed against the Palestinian people. On October 7th, there were actions that are simply unacceptable. The abduction of a child younger than a year old or an elderly woman aged 88 is an act that I am absolutely against. I am utterly opposed to this. I point my finger in the eye of every institution in Israel that justifies the killing of 35,000 Palestinians, including 15,000 children. They strip humanity from the Palestinian people, from its men, women, and children. I tell them the Palestinian child is not the best child in the world. Yet there is no child that is better than the Palestinian child. Every child, including Palestinian children, has the right to live in safety and peace within a sovereign democratic state. The State of Israel, established by a United Nations resolution, which called for two states, cannot become a legitimate and normal state without fulfilling the second part of the resolution, the establishment of a Palestinian state. We propose an ethical alternative to the Israeli society. Due to historical developments, two peoples have found themselves in our homeland. The only solution is to respect the national rights of both peoples and to live in peace, stability, and security. Some are stuck in a culture of death, but we insist on promoting a culture of dignified life for all. Brothers and sisters, standing on the right side of history, a state of Palestine will be established, and it is only a matter of time. Let us work together to shorten this time. In the words our national poet توفيق زياد, ولكني أحمل إيماني الذي لا يتزعزع وهوى يكتسح الكون لشعب يتوجع. I carry with me an unshakable faith and a love that sweeps the cosmos for a people in pain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the moment now, we're going to have a celebration of Palestinian culture. And now we welcome Adnan Joubran from Nazareth, an outstanding oud player, composer, and producer. Alongside his two brothers, Samir and Wissam, they are part of the trio Joubran. But tonight he's performing here on his own ahead of his debut album.
Masal Khair, good evening. Your Excellency, doctors, it's a big pleasure and honor to be here. And I'm not used to hold this mic to speak, especially after such words, precious words. But at the same time, I believe to start healing, if I had to speak one day more than play, I would. I always close my eyes and play. But today, if I had to look in your eyes, I would. If I had to play without my brothers, I would. If that could stop something or start something better, I would. And I would say that each one of you, each one of us, is a survivor. Survivor now today is a big thing. Kids are born and we feel that they are heroes. And that's shameful in a way. I believe that birth is part of our life. And no one should feel hero to be standing here alive. But yes, we are survivors. We are survivors of the same Holocaust, of Vietnam, of the supremacy, of every crisis that happened to the humanity. And when I say we, because we, all, different colors, different religions, we are all human beings. So I believe today my duty is to start something which is healing this. Therefore, I'll close my eyes and just start this healing process, at least for myself, from this pain and from this crisis.
Thank you very much, Adnan. That was incredibly soothing. Thank you. Next up is a fellow Irish and Palestinian actress, writer. We have here Sarah Akha, and she's going to be reciting the story of my family.
The Story of My Family's Nakba by Nouran Al-Hamdan, a Palestinian-American academic. It is a sweet July night, with the smell of citrus heavy in the air. The sound of women ululating and laughter echoes through the hills. The center of the village of Kazaza in Ramla is a celebration, with men jovially drinking bitter coffee and children chasing after one another. My grandmother was one of these children, screaming in delight and trying not to trip over the bare earth. The village had gathered in a pre-celebration of a much-anticipated wedding between my grandfather's older brother, Abdullah, and a woman who was said to be the most beautiful in the village. The year is 1948. The air was pierced by a sudden shout. The voice was shrill and the language foreign. 3 men appeared in front of the gathering. They spoke again, and the foreign language revealed itself to be broken Arabic. The villagers understood who these men were, but strained to understand the words that were shattering the air, until eventually the shards formed. Itla' barra, get out. Abdullah, the soon-to-be groom, stepped forward in an attempt to speak to the men. "No, we won't leave. Why are you here? You should leave." The words barely left his mouth before a gun appeared, then a bullet, then the sound of the shot. It reverberated between the hills, replacing the sound of the children and the ululations. There was now only silence. A silence that began on that July night in 1948 and has hung over the village since. A stillness unbroken for over 70 years. I learned that the story of my grandmother's Nakba was part of a broader campaign to empty the Palestinian cities located today inside of Israel. I was sitting with my grandfather in the courtyard of his home in Amman, the smell of jasmine and citrus and peaches from his garden intoxicating him with the memories of the past. He told me the story. I had never seen my grandfather cry before. He shrank into a boy who had just witnessed his older brother be shot by the Haganah on the night before his wedding. How strange it is to see the events that defined the lives of 3 generations of my family as a mere paragraph in a book. How strange it is to discover that your family's lived experience is considered merely a footnote on the pages of history. We are not a people confined to the pages of history. The Nakba is not a catastrophe that is contained in the space between paper and ink. Abdullah was buried that same night. The people of the village had no time to mourn. The men and women rushed into their small homes and collected only a few of their possessions. The children were scooped up into the arms, strapped onto backs. My grandfather held his mother's hand as they tripped over dirt roads, running over damp earth, while the night turned to dawn. Maybe this is why, for as long as I can remember, my grandfather would wake up as the sun was rising to tend to his small garden. He would dig down to the roots of the few olive trees and water them with special care. He would mist the branches of the peach trees with a spray bottle, as if perfuming them. Every morning, living the morning that he should have lived as a child in his village.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Joining us next is Gazan Dr. Atef Al-Shar, who now lectures at the University of Westminster, and he educates his students about politics of the Arab world and the legacy of colonialism. His book, Poetry and Politics in the Modern Arab World, no doubt combines his insightful analysis of literature and human dynamics.
Thank you so much, and good evening to everybody. I'm very privileged and very honored, and at the same time, I feel very terrified to speak to you because of just the sheer volume of people. I haven't spoken to that number of people in front of me, but I feel very honored and very moved to be invited to speak here. And what I want to say is the echoes of what we live today and the echoes of what happened in 1948. And the scale of what is happening now is obviously extraordinary. When I was asked to speak about the Nakba in 1948 and the Nakba that is ongoing now, and the links are quite extraordinary. We speak about the volume of the number of the people killed between 1947 and 1948, November 1947, and between October or July, 1949, to be the armistice sort of time, to be about 13,000 people. Currently, we are speaking 35,000 people and still counting of people being killed in Gaza and the West Bank. It's an extraordinary number. And when we look at all the years that the Palestinians have suffered through, in addition to the routine destruction of Palestinians, we almost need to, the word Nakba no longer holds all of that. Nakba becomes, we almost need a science of Nakba, like Nakbatology, to almost capture it because of just the sheer volume of destruction that the Palestinians have suffered since 1948. We have so many years, 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, 1978, 1982, 1987, 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, 2014, 2019, 2021, 2024. Each of these are milestones in terms of the destruction and killing and violence that has been visited upon the Palestinians. It's an extraordinary number when we look at what's happening now, what happened in 1948. 1948, we talk about 523 villages that were destroyed and towns that were destroyed and depopulated, Palestinians being dispossessed. We have already heard about 750,000 Palestinians being thrown out of Palestine in 1948. We also talk about, currently the number are 15,000 children and counting, more than 9,000 women, and 75 of Gaza being destroyed and made fully dysfunctional. So many places like hospitals and schools and so on and so forth. It is truly an ongoing Nakba, and the sheer scale of it is unprecedented and terrifying. But nonetheless, I have a family, and I will speak about this a little bit because that makes it a bit more vivid. My family comes from the area of Be'er Saba, of what's called Beersheba in Hebrew or in English, and they sought refuge, like Hassan's family, in Rafah. And they have just been ordered to evacuate just a week ago from the area of Hayy Salam. It feels very anachronistic to talk about the Nakba of 1948 when our families just have now been ordered to evacuate their homes, and actually much of their homes have been destroyed. And I'm just reading today about Hayy Salam and Hayy Jnine, the quarters that I know so well from my childhood just being destroyed. It is an extraordinary image, and that people's life every day revolves around finding means to live for themselves and for their children. I want to read this account from Ahmed Murtaja, from this wonderful journal of Arab Lit Quarterly, where he says, the other fear is about how to meet our and the children's food and drink needs. So many questions swirl around this fear, though I deliberately won't raise them here. Won't raise them here, dear reader, so as to allow you to imagine them for yourself. Oh, how I miss imagination. So even people, they don't have the imagination to think beyond what is so essential in their daily life. But we are fortunate, I think, as Palestinians, that since 1930s, and I have looked at this and written about it, we have produced literature that really shows the people at the peak of their power in terms of expression, in terms of ability, competence, to tell their story to the world and to tell it in the most eloquent of terms, and to remain hopeful. And I want to end this on a note of hope. As many of you know, محمود درويش's poem, هنا عند منحدرات التلال أمام الغروب وفوهة الوقت، قرب بساتين مقطوعة الظل نفعل ما يفعل السجناء وما يفعل العاطلون عن العمل نربي الأمل. I will just translate it myself here. Here by the slopes of hilltops in the front of the sunset and the muzzle of time, near gardens
acting has taken him all over the world, sharing his talents on stage, in comedy, and also behind the lens.
Gonna read a testimony from the Nakba in 1948. But before that, today when I was coming to this event, I got a phone call from my family. I want to highlight this thing not just because it's personal to me, but we need to think about it a lot. My little brother got arrested by the Israeli intelligence service today. And I feel so bad because I know what's going on right now to the prisoners in Palestine, in the Israeli jails. So just think about them, because the torturing and the humiliating stuff that's happening to them is insane. It's the most disgusting things I've ever heard about from stories in the prisons. So just keep it in your mind. Thank you. I mean, the terrorist scene, I forgot my child. I visited my grandmother to ask her to talk to me about the Nakba. I was worried that might hurt her to remember these terrible events, but she told me, between the chaos of war and the chaos inside me, I forgot everything, and I left. I left my most precious things, my beautiful memories. My hometown, Bettina, was very beautiful. The morning sunrise. For the first time, the sunrise was strange and lonely. My eyes did not sleep for a single moment that night. And the sound of the knocking on the door in this morning was a warning that it's all over. I only remember the sound of the cries of children and the woman mourning over the murderers. The terrorist scene, and the chaos of the catastrophe. I forgot my child indoors. I returned almost paralyzed with fear that they might have taken him or killed him, or maybe the house had collapsed on top of him because of the bombing. I arrived at the house and found him crying alone. I picked him up and fled the house. As my grandmother spoke, I cursed the Nakba and the occupation. I was walking on a rough road with my family, friends, and neighbors. We stayed homeless, for our soul was stolen from us. Our homeland was gone. A young boy walked in front of me, and I could see the sadness in his eyes. With dirty hair and mud-covered face, he was looking left and right, not knowing where he was. "Where's your mother, baby?" I said. "My mom went to heaven, and I stayed with my dad," he replied. Many children lose their loved ones, either a father, a mother, or a brother, or a sister. Their bodies remain buried in the ground, and yet we are not allowed to stay. I cursed the occupation again. I remember that we walked for long hours, feeling tired. Our feet and bodies were tired, but eventually we reached Gaza. That was 1948. People stayed in the camps with nothing for many months until the United Nations came to help the people, the Iron Man, to give them homes. This was the story my grandmother told me, her Nakba. I cursed the occupation one more time, kissed my grandmother on her forehead, and told her that we will return in God's will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mumtaz. Our next speaker requires no introduction. Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sitta has played a pivotal role, not only in saving the life of many people in Gaza, thousands of people while he was there in Gaza, but of his return work. He's come back to spread the word of the diabolical scenes he witnessed, and he's done so tirelessly. We admire you greatly. Thank you very much.
we celebrate 76 years of resistance to erasure, 76 years of defiance and rebirth, I wanted to share with you one of the guiding themes of the last 76 years of the Lendka that has really shaped my life and my awareness of what I wanted to do. What people don't realize is that health and resistance to the erasure and the world of death that Zionists wanted the Palestinians to inhabit. Palestinians stuck to health, the provision of health care, from the very early 50s as part of that resistance. The first generation of Palestinian doctors who had graduated immediately after the Nakba, who had come from what was then called Fuad University in Cairo or the American University in Beirut, very quickly started to establish clinics in the Palestinian refugee camps, in Al-Wahdat, in Yarmouk, in the refugee camps in Lebanon. And then that quickly evolved into what then became the Palestine Red Crescent Society, which became for the first time in any national liberation movement an intrinsic part of the Palestine Liberation Organization. And we witnessed how our people, before the world got to understand the meaning of the word necropolitics or the politics of death, our people identified the provision of health, the provision of life, as part of their resistance to the world of death that Zionism and its erasure of the Palestinians wanted. The Palestine Red Crescent Society then built its clinics in every refugee camp available and became part of the resistance to Israeli attacks on Palestinian refugee camps. And we saw how in South Lebanon, in the refugee camps in Beirut, even in Syria and in Jordan, that resistance through the provision of healthcare became an intrinsic part of our resistance to the logic of elimination of Zionist settler colonialism. During the siege and the massacre of Tal al-Za'ta, what emerged are the stories of the doctors who chose to stay with their people and defend them. During the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in '82, the stories of doctors who stayed in the hospitals in South Lebanon and remained with their patients until these areas were overrun by the Israeli army. When we look at the destruction, the current destruction of the health system in Gaza, we need to remind ourselves that on the eve of the 4th of June 1982, Israel began its invasion of Lebanon by bombing every single Palestine Red Crescent Society clinic and hospital in Lebanon, from the far south to the far north. We need to remind ourselves that our people resisted then through their doctors and nurses. And we need to remember, and ironically, that the Sabra and Shatila massacre began with a massacre in what was then called the Gaza Hospital on the outskirts of Sabra. And so when the first Intifada came, the natural thing for that new chapter in Palestinian resistance was for the grassroots organizations such as the medical relief committees and the health workers committees to become part of that resistance. And the story of the resistance to the world of death through life, through the giving of life, through the defense for our people's right to life and right to health, continued during all of the wars in Gaza, during the invasions in the West Bank, until this war. And it was as a result of that that Israel chose to make the destruction of the Palestinian health system central to its genocidal project. Israel understood that we as a people defend ourselves and we defend our right to life through the provision of healthcare to our people. And what began on the 17th of October with the Ahli Baptist massacre and then moved on to the destruction of the children's hospitals and the destruction of the Indonesian hospital and the destruction of every other hospital, and then the conversion of hospitals into mass graves in Shifa and in Nasr, is an attempt at erasure of a people that specifically identifies the provision of healthcare as critical to its war of liberation, as critical to its defense of its people and to its resistance of the logic of elimination that started with massacres and expulsion and exclusion and has now evolved into the final solution of genocidal erasure. And that is why they killed Dr. Adnan al-Bursh in prison. That is why they executed Dr. Ahmed Maqadme at Shifa Hospital. That is why they targeted over 400 doctors and nurses. As they got home, within minutes of getting home, they killed them with their families, like Dr. Haytham Abu Hani, the head of emergency medicine at Shifa. And that is why we get these stories that of all of the imprisoned Palestinians, the Israeli forces specifically target health workers for extra harsh treatment because they understand that our people understood from day one that this world of death they meant for us could only be resisted by a world of life and a world of health and a world of love. When I was at Shifa Hospital, I remember looking at the way people responded to that initial wave of Israeli leaders proclaiming that they wanted to expel Palestinians again, they wanted to empty Gaza, they wanted the Nakba too, as Dictor said. And I remember, even though I had lived my life as the son of a Nakba survivor, as a refugee, it had never occurred to me that what the Israelis failed to understand and what we see now happening in Rafah as people head further back north rather than across the border into Egypt like the Israelis were hoping, is that what has become a formative experience in the national identity of Palestinians, and which is what stopped Palestinians leaving Gaza despite the genocide, and what has made 600,000 to 700,000 stay in the northern part of Gaza despite the famine, is that the social death that is becoming a refugee is a formative part of our current and modern identity. We understand, our people understand, that when you become a refugee, you die forever, and your children will die with you forever. And for generations, that death that never ends, that social death of becoming a refugee will never end. And that is why people have stayed, despite the massacres, despite the bombing. And every time the Israelis try to hand them into Rafah, so that at the final push they can push them across the border, our people go back further north because they understand that it is when you die physically, as one of my patients told me, you die once. When you become a refugee, you die every day for 3 or 4 generations to come. So as hard as it is, we are here to celebrate a people that refuses to die. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ghassan. Joining us next is Rola Azar, also from Nazareth, an artist and a singer, and she has distinguished herself by fusing her folklore and her heritage in a modern manner. She sings of her homeland, its people, and its suffering.
Good evening. طب راح أحكي بالإنجليزي. So this song or this way of singing was invented by Palestinian women and mothers. So, like, it's a code language, so they can they can talk or communicate with their beloved ones inside the prisons, and the occupation don't understand. يا طالعين عيني للجبل يا مول الموقدين النار بيني لليوم يوما عيني للهنا يا روح ما بدي منك لكم خلعة ولا لا 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 بدي زنار بيني لليوم يوما عيني للهنا يا روح ما بدي منك لكم خلعة ولا لا 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 بدي ملبوس بيني لليوم يوما عيني للهنا يا روح إلا غزالي للي جواني لليكم محبوس بيني لليوم يوما عيني للهنا يا روح إلا غزالي للي جواني لليكم ما يدوم بيني لليوم يوما عيني للهنا يا روح. وين الساوند؟ وهي الأغنية بتجسد مشهد من وقت الانتداب البريطاني على فلسطين لما كانت النساء تروح تستقبل رجالها من بعد الحرب وكانت تشوف الفرس راجعة لحالها كانت تعرف إنه استشهد، كانت ترجع الفرس مع البارودة. طلت البارودة والسبع ما طل يا بوز البارودة من دمه مبتل. طلت البارودة والسبع ما جاش يا بوز البارودة من دمه مرتاش. مع السلامة وين رايح مع السلامة يا فايت مع السلامة وين رايح مع السلامة يا فايت مع السلامة وين بدك لقعد علي دربك ورد طلات البارود والسابع ما طل يا بودي من دمه مبتل. طلات البارود والسابع ما جاش يا بوز البارود من دمه مرتاح. هي يما ودعيني قبل ما امشي هي يما ودعيني قبل ما امشي ما تدري بعثراتي وين امشي وصلاني الحب ضعني لحبايا حمرا يا أصيلي وين رحتي فيه لباب السرايا بعلمي تركتي ما بيني وبينك سلسلة وادي وين رحت غالي يا عز أحبابي.
Thank you, Roland and Adnan. Even the bells of Westminster hush to listen to you tonight. Next up is the Right Honourable Sir Alan Duncan, a British former politician who previously served as Minister of State for International Development and Minister of State for Europe and the Americas. As members of the Conservative Party, he was MP for Rutland and Melton. Thank you for joining us.
Your Excellencies, my friends, ignorance of history is one of the greatest enemies of peace. If you don't know the facts of the past, you have no context for your opinions in the present. And today we remember a crucial moment in history which determined the course of the century that followed and might yet still determine the course of the next one. Today we mark solemnly and proudly the 76 years since over 700,000 Palestinians were brutally driven from their homes and their land. Many here today are from families who were displaced, and some may even be old enough, as we've seen, to remember the events themselves. A mere 30 years after Arthur Balfour declared on behalf of the British government that a national home for the Jewish people could be established in Palestine, the Israelis then took it through violence, displacement, and terror. It left the other half of that declaration unfulfilled, and whereas Israel became a nation, that same recognition has been denied to Palestinians. The creation of Israel rendered Palestinians stateless. It left the people pushed out of a new country and not allowed to have one of their own. By what right do any other actors, be they governments, organizations, or armies, say that Palestine is to be forbidden its own statehood? The UN decided that Israel was to have that recognition, and since 1948, Israel has been and is Israel. It's a country, and nobody should deny the fact. And so then should Palestine have been Palestine. But today, 76 years later, that right continues to be denied. And it's not just because it hasn't happened, it's because it has been thwarted and blocked so that it could not happen. Israel established its own country, but ever since, it has been denying Palestinians their rights, their land, and a country of their own. But the United Nations, which granted Israel its statement, is the same United Nations which has declared that Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal. International law is international law. You cannot just pick and choose the rules you wish to obey and ignore the ones you don't. For many decades, it has been the clear policy of respected nations such as the US and the UK that Israeli settlements are illegal and contrary to international law. But still, the land is taken, the houses are demolished, the olive trees are chopped down, and Palestinian land and property is stolen. Israel cannot call itself a democracy unless it behaves like one. Democracy is not just about elections, it's about everything else that goes with them. Democracy does not permit a majority group to systematically oppress a minority. No self-respecting democracy should consider itself such with the sort of extremists who sit around the cabinet table of Netanyahu. And no proper democracy should allow its army to protect illegal settlers as they violently attack Palestinians, take their property, and even steal aid destined for those facing famine in Gaza. Yet while all of this has been happening under the government of Netanyahu, we have hardly heard a squeak of condemnation from the United Kingdom. It is as if our ministers do not believe in their own government's policy. Perhaps at last, however, we're just beginning to see some signs from the US government that they will take steps against illegal settlers and settlements. Maybe at long last, there is some hope that the double standards applied to Israeli misconduct and Palestinian rights will be corrected. And it's all credit to President Biden if he takes such steps. But let's be clear as we sit here tonight that those who have taken to the streets in the last few months are not anti-Semitic, nor are they some part of a sinister Islamist movement. Neither accusation should be allowed to detract from the fundamental cause they uphold, which is that Palestine has the right to be a state. Indeed, many are Christian, and it's their holy land. And the students who are campaigning in universities are not rabid militants. They are filling a moral vacuum created by inadequate politicians. So are those who have been marching every week to call for Palestine to be free. All must do so free of anti-Semitism and free of violence or vandalism, but they should proudly march on. They are putting to shame a generation of politicians who seem not to know their history and who fail to appreciate their historic obligation to complete and fulfill the commitment made in 1917. So as we've heard, the Nakba of 1948 is a process that continues even now. Some say the atrocities in Gaza today is a second Nakba, and many Israeli leaders are promising it will be. But in truth, it has been a continuous story of Palestinian dispossession and expulsion at the hands of Israel with international complicity. If ever any good was to come out of the violence of those first 2 years during 1947 to 49, it should have seen the creation of both the State of Israel and the State of Palestine, who for the last 76 years could have been living side by side in peace and prosperity. Instead, after being granted its statehood, Israel has always pushed for more. And the Permanent Five of the United Nations must now confirm what the wider UN has called for. Palestine should be recognized as a state, and in the meantime, the whole world should shout ever more loudly to Israel, end the occupation and get out of Palestine because it is not your country.
you, Sir Alan, for using your voice and your influence. Our next citation is from Ramzi Al-Deba, who will be reciting his Gaza's Bell Jar. Ramzi is a tech entrepreneur and co-founder of the UK Palestine Affairs Network.
Thank you for hosting me here today. Today I'll be reading a piece written by Malak Hijazi, a 23-year-old Palestinian comparative literature graduate living in Gaza City, in the north of Gaza. The piece is called Gaza's Bell Jar and was written on the 18th of April, 2024. To note, the imagery and experiences reflected in this piece mirror those of the Nekbeh 76 years ago and exemplify the ongoing Nekbeh taking place in Gaza today. This is also taking place to differing extents across the West Bank and Palestinian towns and villages across historic Palestine to erase our presence, culture, and identity. Gaza's Bell Jar. I always found it hard to understand why my family left our small village in 1948 and sought refuge in Gaza. No more. In the past 6 months, relatives, though not my immediate family, have been forced to relocate from house to house several times to escape Israel's genocidal violence. It was like a new Nekbeh. Our circumstances seem to replay the black and white images on the website of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, except we carried mobile phones and laptops. Gaza and our village are very close, but we are unable to go there. Israel won't allow it. I was raised as a refugee. I went to an UNRWA school. I lived in a refugee camp. Even this doesn't stop me now experiencing firsthand the reality of displacement. My grandfather, who fled to Egypt in 1967 without his children, never returned. The reality is that Palestinians seldom come back home once they leave. Indeed, after the Nekbeh of 1948, Israel made sure to preclude refugees returning by writing a law confiscating their properties and lands. This is why my father adamantly refused to move to the southern Gaza Strip during the current genocidal war. Despite the Israeli army bombarding us with thousands of recording messages instructing us to relocate. Many of our neighbors did migrate southward. During this war, I developed a habit of working out who had left their homes from those who had stayed, based on their laundry lines. The Abu Mahmoud family, for instance, left their clothes hanging out, yet they had relocated. Rubble is everywhere, with bombed and burned houses and schools full of displaced people who have no homes. Garbage litters the street alongside hungry cats and decomposing bodies. The market is nearly empty. People are angry and hungry. Sometimes I take long minutes to remember what the place was like before the disaster. Other times I get lost on my way back home. I gaze out the non-glass window, just a frame covered with nylon wrap. It's a window in our partially destroyed house. I gaze out the non-glass window, just a frame, I observe our neighborhood with cars plastered and piled up like rusty metal. Nearby lies a house, the owners of which burned to death inside when a shell struck their home. I stare at the debris once more, scattered clothes, papers, utensils, all shattered dreams, big and small. It's been over a month since the people in the nearby house were burned. As a child, I used to wonder how people dared to live next to a cemetery, but now, surrounded by destruction, it seems all too familiar. Sometimes I question why I insist on staying here, despite the uncertainty and scarcity, but because the city is my home. Why should we be forced to leave against our will? How can it be acceptable to let people starve or make life impossible until they feel they have no choice but to flee? To give you a life in a day, and so here is how my day unfolded. I woke up at 5:43 a.m. I listened to the news on the radio because there was no internet. I brewed a cup of tea without sugar. The tea wasn't enjoyable. I read some of Sylvia Plath's novel, The Bell Jar. I caught the end of the news hour. I ate some bread with a drizzle of olive oil and za'atar. I sat by the window, listening to our neighbor Amrami's accounts of various flour bag massacres. Once, she said, the Israeli army compelled trucks to run over wounded men. In a recent flour bag massacre, a man arrived in the neighborhood, bearing the dead body of a boy, igniting cries of anguish. It was our neighbor Ahmed, a 17-year-old with curly blonde hair and brown skin, a distinct appearance. Separated for 6 months from his family, who followed the Israeli army's directive to relocate south, Ahmed insisted on staying with his relatives here. While fetching a bag of flour, he perished alongside 100 others awaiting aid. Ahmed went unburied by family members, and his mother missed his final moments. I felt completely calm and empty, like the center of a tornado. As I returned to my book, I felt the weight of the bell jar that had trapped me since the 7th of October. I sensed myself dissolving into the shadows, becoming an obscure reflection of someone I couldn't recognize, as if I were the inverse of a person I had never encountered before. Inspired by Plath, who catalogued what she couldn't do, I began listing my own limitations during this brief period. I can't sleep because of the sound of missiles and Israeli warplanes, especially the spy drones that prevent me from taking my customary noon nap. The noise never stops, and when the weather is cloudy, they come closer to the window, making me feel like I should open it and scream, "There's nothing interesting, you fools! You're wasting effort and fuel on nothing. What's important on this street?" Children search in the rubble of bombed houses for copper to sell. They don't go to school, and there's no indication they'll return to education soon. A woman screams at her son from the window, scolding him, "Come back! I'd sooner eat sand than have them take you away from me." He plans to go to secure a sack of flour, despite the risk of encountering the Israeli army and its soldiers' predilection for killing the hungry. In the school that shelters displaced people, there are daily fights over water, and if unusually water is available, there are fights over food and laundry space. Nothing is important here. A girl who does nothing but read books tries to sleep to pass the time. I considered writing that I've lost hope in life, but I believe I've lost meaning in life too. The idea of suicide is rejected for a coward like me. War presents tempting opportunities for death, yet I don't desire the slow demise it offers. I seek a quick end, like a needle prick. I don't wish for the roof to collapse on me with a missile from an F-35 warplane, as it did with my cousins, or to be consumed by a fiery shell like those that claimed our neighbors' lives in the adjacent house. Nor do I desire a rounded bullet from a quadcopter to maim me like my mom's friend, son, or to render me brain dead without actually dying like our neighbor. The available modes of death seem equally unappealing. Can I pass away peacefully, surrounded by loved ones on a clean white bed, uttering some final words before everything fades? Such a peaceful end appears impossible. I contemplate Israel's objectives, perplexed by the indiscriminate bombing. In the quiet solitude of my partially destroyed home, surrounded by the remnants of a life now shattered by war, I find myself reflecting on Sylvia Plath's poignant imagery of the bell jar, where the world seems blank and motionless, like a bad dream. As I gaze out at the desolation beyond my window, I can't help but feel the weight of despair. But amid the devastation, there is a flicker of resilience that refuses to be extinguished. It is the same resilience that has sustained my family through generations of displacement and hardship, the same resilience that keeps us rooted to this land, despite the constant threats to our existence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramzi. We now have a message straight from Gaza, which will be read by Talene Rawad.
This is a poem written by a Palestinian poet and writer, Khalid al-Jum'a. We were playing hide and seek. My dad told me to hide, and he would count to 10, then search for me. I hid in the car, didn't hear my dad counting, so I started counting to know when he'd finish and start searching for me. Since I was still 6, I continued counting to 100, not knowing what comes after. I then counted another 100 and another 100, but my dad didn't appear. It seems he's searching for me somewhere else, so I assumed I've won the game. But what are all these military tanks and all these soldiers? My dad didn't tell me anyone else who had joined the game. I'm scared.
Our final speaker tonight is the Palestinian photojournalist Motaz Azaiza. Motaz's images have haunted us all for the last 7 months, and I think he's done a remarkable, tireless job in being able to bring the message from Gaza straight into our living rooms, onto our phones, and straight into our nightmares. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ambassador, Your Excellency, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm so glad today to be here, and at the same time, I'm so sad for my country and my people. I don't know, most of you knows me after the genocide, but not all of you know me before. I used to be the photographer of the beauty of Gaza, not the destruction of Gaza. I was always fighting with my camera to make beautiful pictures from my hometown. And once of time, all the beauty I captured is gone. I lost the people that I captured my pictures by killing them by the Israeli occupation. I lost the places that I used to hang out there and take pictures there. I lost my access to the city of Gaza. I'm kind of lost all the days I spent in my home trying to show the beauty from there. I'm young, I'm 25 years old. I didn't live the first Nakba in 1948, but I used to hear about it from the old people in the refugee camps when I used to go there taking pictures, hearing the stories and how hard it was for them. And I kept telling myself, I wish to be in these days to document what happened to my people. And once of time, I found myself, my wish came true for sorry, that in the second Nakba, I was old enough to witness and to document with my camera. And at times I feel so sorry, and sometimes I say I wish I didn't do that, because I literally was a beauty maker. And most of the time, I'm now a photographer for this kind of pictures, for the destruction, for the displacement, and the people who lost their homes. My plan to be always a beauty photographer failed, but I thank God for one thing, that He used me in a good way to serve my home, my country, and I wish the day that come to document the free Palestine, not only ending of the genocide. So thank you so much. This is why I'm stuck with this life. I don't want to die now. I want to wait till I see the free Palestine, and then we can die later. Thank you so much.
Power to you, Motaz. Before our last performance, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us tonight. I think the word of the evening is symbolic of the Palestinian spirit, and that is perseverance. Let us all persevere. Let us all feel galvanized by our speakers and by the artists, by their brilliance, by their activism, and by their truth. It's my particular delight tonight now to introduce you to Omar Kamal, a singer and composer from Nablus and a friend from many years ago. Omar began performing and singing from the tender age of 5 and has a whole repertoire of his own, but tonight he's singing Mautini.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for supporting Dr. Hassam, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for inviting me. And we will, it's my honor and privilege to end this evening with a timeless national anthem for Palestine, for the Arab world, and for everyone who strives for freedom. Please. موطني موطني الجلال والجمال والثناء والبهاء في رباك والحياة والنجاة والهناء والرجاء في هواك في هواك هل أرى سالما منعما وغانما مكرما سالما منعما وغانما مكرما هل أراك في علاك تبلغ السماء تبلغ السماء موطني 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 الشباب لن يكل همه أن يستقل أو يبيد أو يبيد نستقي من الردى ولن نكون للعدا والعبيد والعبيد لا نريد كلنا المؤبدا وعيشنا المنكدا كلنا المؤبدا وعيشنا المنكدا لا نريد نزلنا موطني كنت نفرف يا هنا في علا قاهرا عيدا قاهرا عيدا موطني 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 شكرا.